Welcome everybody, welcome to chapter 6, the labor market. The structure of this chapter is as follows, that in the beginning we'll talk about the empirics. So we got a few impressions related the American labor market, but also a comparison between like unemployment rates in the US and unemployment rates in Germany. Afterwards, we talk about some smaller theoretical models, and in the end we are deriving one explicit theoretical model where we talk about the wage setting relationship and the price setting relationship, and with these two relationships we are able to explain the so-called natural rate of unemployment as well as the real wage. These are the learning objectives of chapter 6. So after we have worked through this chapter, we should know the definition of the reservation wage and efficiency wage. We should also know why companies have an incentive to pay a higher wage rate compared to the reservation wage. And we should also know how this influences labor demand and the unemployment rate. We should know something about the price setting and the wage setting relationships, how the real wage and the natural level of unemployment are determined in a simple labor market model, and how different shocks influence the equilibrium value of the real wage rate as well as the unemployment rate. Let's start with subchapter 6.1, where we talk about the empirics. Here you can see a breakdown of the American population. There are 301 million inhabitants in the US. These are numbers from 2006. Some people are under 15 and some people are older than 65. So that the non-institutional civilian population is equal to 228 million. Of these 228 million, some are out of the labor force. So 77.4 million people are out of the labor force. For example, millionaires and billionaires who are not providing the factor labor at the labor market, who are not supplying themselves on the labor market, because they can live from the interest income or the dividend income from their capital. Also, in case that mom and or dad stay at home because they have to take care of the kids, they are out of the labor force. Then we have the so-called civilian labor force, 151 million people. Some of them are employed, others are unemployed. When you want to compute the unemployment rate, then you have to set the number of people which are unemployed in relation to the civilian labor force, and then you get the unemployment rate. In the next slide, you can see three different sectors: the sector of employment and the sector of unemployment, as well as this sector here out of the labor force. So sometimes when we think about unemployment rate and an increase in unemployment rate, for example, we frequently think that when the unemployment rate increases, then the employment rate has to decrease. So we are frequently just considering these two sectors here. But the other sector, like out of the labor force, is also a very important sector. Within this chapter, we will see one situation where the employment is pretty constant, unemployment rate decreases, but the unemployment rate decreases because the people are moving from this sector out of the labor force. So it could be the case that some unemployed people are not looking actively for a job anymore. They are switching from from unemployment to the sector out of the labor force because they are so frustrated. And hence this decrease of the unemployment rate is not a good sign, but is a very bad sign, because the people are not looking for a job anymore. Therefore, it's very important that we always consider this third sector here out of the labor force can be an important driver of either employment or unemployment rates. The airport example, unemployment rates do not display the dynamics. What does that mean? Let's assume that we have a pretty stable unemployment rate. The unemployment rate is equal to 5% and it's constant. It's constant for like a few quarters or even a few years. Does this imply that the labor market is pretty inflexible? No, it doesn't have to be the case. Let's have a look at two different economies. In economy A, the labor force is equal to 100 and 95 people are working and 5 people are unemployed, so that the unemployment rate is equal to 5%. But in economy A, it's the case that always the same people are unemployed. The very same people are unemployed for a longer time period. And hence, this labor market is very inflexible. Let's compare it with scenario B, with economy B, where also like 100 people are in the labor force, 95 have a job, and 5 are unemployed. But these 5 people, after 1 month, they find a job, and then 5 other people become unemployed. But the duration of unemployment for like the single person who is unemployed, it's only 1 month. So there we have a very flexible labor market in economy B. And this implies that a constant unemployment rate of 5% is in line with a very inflexible labor market, but could also point into the direction that we are dealing with a very flexible labor market. What is the relationship to the airport? Like an airport can be very crowded, like a lot of people can be on one airport because of the fact that there is a fog, and it's not the case that the planes can depart or land, and hence the very same people are stuck on this crowded airport. But it could also be the case that this airport is a very crowded hub, like a lot of people are rushing into the airport and then they are onboarding again to a different plane, to a different destination. And this airport is very busy, like a lot of people are arriving, but also a lot of people are departing. And the same is true when it comes to the labor market. We had a look already at economy A and economy B. In the US, the proportion of workers that start or terminate unemployment is relatively high. 75% of the employees terminate the labor contract, not the employer. In the US, also the proportion of workers who are laid off or hired are higher compared to Germany. So the proportion of workers that become unemployed within 1 month in the US, it's 1.2%. In Germany, it's 0.4%. In the US, the duration of unemployment is relatively low. The average duration in the US is 2.3 months, and in Germany, it's 8 months. On this slide, we can see the development of the unemployment rate in the US and Germany over time. The US, this is the red and blue line, and in Germany, it's the red and yellow line. The time period is 2008 until the beginning of 2013. And so we can talk about the development of the unemployment rate during the financial crisis 2008-2009. So what we can see here is that the unemployment rate in the US doubles from 5% before the crisis it increases within a few months to the level of 10%. So the unemployment rate in the US doubles. Completely different development in Germany. In 2008, the unemployment rate even decreases. And then at the end of 2008, beginning of 2009, we can see a small increase in the unemployment rate. And when we look at the unemployment rate of Germany, we would never guess that there is a big economic crisis going on where German GDP decreases by -5%. So we would never guess that in case that we just have a look at these labor market figures. So this shock was completely digested in a different way in the American labor market compared to the German labor market. What we can also see in this graph is that from the end of 2010, beginning of 2011, it's a case that the unemployment rate in the US decreases again. Is that a good sign or a bad sign that the unemployment rate decreases? Let's have a look at some more empirical evidence. Here we are looking at one study from Berger or Vierke published in 2012 related to the US. We can see some crisis situation, for example here, oil price shock 1, oil price shock 2, then the burst of the dot-com bubble and the 9/11 recession. And here we can see the most recent recession, 2008-2009, the great financial crisis. The US economy was in a peak in 2007, last quarter, and there are 4 lines. The blue line, that's the unemployment rate. The red line, it is the labor force participation rate, and the green line, this is the employment to population ratio. The blue line increases from 0 to 5. What does that imply? Let's have a look here. We can see here that the unemployment rate increases from 5% to 10%. This is a change of 5 percentage points. And we also see the change of the 5 percentage points here in this figure. Unemployment rate changes by 5 percentage points, and we can also see here that the unemployment rate decreases again after 2010. Is it a good sign or a bad sign? Let's have a look at the other curves. When we look at the green curve, the employment to population ratio, it's almost constant after 2009. Therefore, this decrease in the unemployment rate is not driven by a higher rate of employment. It's driven by this red line, the lower labor force participation rate. So it might be the case that some very frustrated unemployed people, they are not looking for a job anymore, but they are dropping out of the labor force. And this is a very bad sign. It could be also the case that people which are 60 and older, they are leaving the labor force because they are unemployed, they are early retiring, and hence they are not in the labor force anymore. This could be like a second explanation: frustrated workers or early retirement. But definitely it doesn't seem to be a good sign here. It's not the case that employment is picking up, but people are leaving the labor force. On this slide, we can see also a comparison of the unemployment rates in Germany, which is the red line, and the US, which is like the black line. The time period is longer than before. It's from 1960 to 2005. Before the 1980s and until the mid-1980s, it's a case that the unemployment rate in the US is larger than the unemployment rate in Germany. So here the black line is above the red line. But then something changes in the 1980s. Since the mid-80s, the unemployment rate in the US decreased and the unemployment rate in Germany increased. Furthermore, we also learn from this graph that during a recession, the unemployment rate increases, and during a boom, the unemployment rate decreases. Like these shaded areas here, they always indicate a recession. Oil price shock 1, oil price shock 2, bursting of the dot-com bubble, and the attacks on 9/11. What are the effects of a lower demand for labor? When there are less hiring activities, we have a drop of open positions. When the unemployment rate is already very high, then those unemployed people have a low probability to find a job. A low probability to find a job because a lot of people which are unemployed are competing to find a new job, and there are not too many open positions. Furthermore, when the demand for labor is lower, companies terminate employment and the risk of getting fired increases. Let's have a look whether these claims are backed by empirical evidence. Here, once more, we have a graph, a line diagram, unemployment rate, that's the red line over time in the US. This has to be read against the left axis, the red axis. Then we have a blue line here and a blue axis. The blue line, this is the proportion of unemployed workers finding a job each month. We have to be careful to some extent here because the red axis is inverted. The high numbers are on the bottom and the low numbers are on top. And therefore, it is the case that here, for example, in this recession, unemployment rate increases and the proportion of unemployed workers finding a job each month decreases. So at this point in time, the number was at the level of 24%, and the peak, it is on the level of only 17%. So during a recession, the number of unemployed workers finding a job decreases. On slide number 12, we can also see the unemployment rate plotted against the left axis, also for the US. And then the blue line, this is the monthly separation rate, like the number of employed people which are losing their job within 1 month. So, for example, this number here, 2.5%, implies that 2.5% of all employed people, they lose a job each month. Also here, it's a case that during a recession, this number increases, like the likelihood of losing a job in a recession increases. Let's sum up this section. If the unemployment rate is high, there is also a higher probability to lose a job. And if the unemployment rate is high, then there is a low probability for unemployed people to find a new job. And therefore, the duration of unemployment increases in case that the unemployment rates are high. This is the end of the empirical part. I'll make a break here, give you some minutes to digest, and then we meet again to talk about some smaller theoretical approaches. Thank you very much. Have a nice day. Bye-bye.